Level 1. This is why some of the most disciplined people actually use the least willpower. And once you see the research behind that idea, the way you've been thinking about discipline may never look the same again. Most of us grow up believing the same story. Success belongs to people with endless discipline, the ones who wake up early, resist every temptation, and keep pushing long after everyone else gives up. When staying consistent feels difficult, it's easy to assume you're the problem. Here's the thing. Modern psychology tells a different story. Scientists rarely focus on the word discipline. Instead, they study self-control or self-regulation, which describes your ability to keep moving toward a long-term goal even when something easier or more enjoyable pulls at your attention. At first, that sounds like the exact same thing. What nobody expected is that researchers found people who appear highly disciplined often spend less time fighting temptation because they build routines, create habits, remove distractions before they become problems, and make good choices easier while making bad ones harder. Which meant something surprising. What looks like incredible discipline from the outside often reflects a carefully designed system instead of nonstop self-control. That changes the conversation completely. Instead of asking how you can become more disciplined, a better question is how you can reach a point where you need less discipline every day. The answer takes us back to a debate that began in 1998, when psychologists introduced an idea that changed the way millions of people thought about willpower. Level 2. The story becomes even more interesting once you go back to 1998, because that year psychologist Roy F. Baumeister and his colleagues introduced one of the best-known ideas in self-control research. Their proposal sounded simple. Willpower works like a muscle, and the idea eventually became known as the strength model of self-control. One experiment captured everyone's attention. Participants who resisted eating chocolate later gave up sooner on a difficult puzzle than people who had been allowed to eat it, which led researchers to suggest that every act of self-control temporarily drained your ability to keep exercising it. For years, that explanation shaped the public conversation around discipline. If staying focused became harder later in the day, many people believed their willpower had simply run out. Here's where everything shifted. Science keeps testing its biggest ideas, even the popular ones, and years later, researchers began repeating those experiments to see if the same results would appear. What nobody expected was that several large analyses painted a less certain picture. Some researchers argued publication bias may have influenced earlier findings, while others reported that the effect did not consistently replicate. That transformed one of psychology's most influential explanations into one of its biggest debates. And once the simple willpower battery no longer explained everything, researchers started looking somewhere much closer to your everyday life. The next clue wasn't hidden in another experiment. It was hiding inside your daily routine. Level 3. Your daily routine reveals something most people never notice. Many of the choices you make don't feel like choices at all because you've repeated them so many times that they happen almost automatically. Research led by Wendy Wood estimated that about 43% of everyday behaviors occur in repeated contexts, making them highly habitual rather than fully deliberate, which completely changes the way consistency starts to look. Here's the thing. If nearly half of your everyday behavior follows familiar patterns, then constant effort may not be carrying as much of the load as you thought. Another finding surprised researchers even more. People with high self-control often experience less temptation instead of more, which sounds backwards because most of us picture disciplined people spending every day resisting distractions. What actually happens looks much simpler. They shape their environment, remove temptations before they appear, build routines that repeat themselves, and make the better choice easier than the worse one. Over time, those habits become more automatic, which means they demand less conscious effort than making the same difficult decision over and over again. That doesn't prove discipline is fake. Instead, it shows that what looks like discipline from the outside often rests on habits quietly doing much of the work behind the scenes. One belief, however, refuses to disappear. You've probably heard it takes 21 days to build a habit, but the research tells a very different story. Level 4. The famous 21-day rule sounds convincing, yet the evidence doesn't support it. Here's what actually happened. The idea spread through observations made by plastic surgeon Maxwell Maltz, rather than through controlled habit formation experiments, and later scientific research reached a very different conclusion. In 2009, researcher Philippa Lally studied habit formation and found that the average time came to 66 days. But even that number doesn't tell the whole story because participants ranged from 18 days to 254 days. That wide range changes everything. Different habits develop at different speeds. Different people build routines differently, and there simply isn't one magical number that works for everyone, which meant struggling after 3 weeks doesn't tell you that you've failed. The research suggests it's completely normal for habits to take much longer. Here's the next twist. The discussion around discipline didn't stop with habit research, because more recent reviews describe self-control as something influenced by motivation, fatigue, recovery, physiology, and the situations you place yourself in. Instead of one invisible battery running empty, your behavior reflects several different forces working together. And once you recognize that bigger picture, the original question begins to change. The final piece isn't whether discipline exists. It's understanding what discipline actually is. Level 5. Now all of those pieces fit together, and the answer looks very different from the story most of us learned. Modern research doesn't support the claim that discipline is just a lie. At the same time, it doesn't support the idea that success belongs only to people who force themselves to work harder every single day. Here's what the evidence consistently points toward. Self-control matters, motivation matters, habits matter, your environment matters, fatigue matters, and stress matters, because none of them works in isolation. That's why the most disciplined-looking people don't necessarily succeed because they possess endless willpower. More often, they build routines that remove unnecessary decisions, reduce temptations before they appear, and allow habits to handle more of the work over time. The long debate over ego depletion reinforces that point. Scientists continue refining their understanding of self-control, and the conversation now focuses on how motivation, recovery, fatigue, and context interact. Instead of treating willpower like a simple battery that runs out, the next time you catch yourself thinking you simply don't have enough discipline, remember what the research actually shows. You're not necessarily missing a special trait. You're often asking discipline to solve problems that habits and well-designed systems solve far more effectively. That brings us back to the opening idea. The people who seem the most disciplined often look effortless because they design their lives to rely on less willpower, not more. The biggest myth isn't discipline itself. It's believing discipline has to carry the entire weight of your future.